Howdy, and welcome to another episode here at Crazy for Texas. I'm your host, Amber, and our goal here at Crazy for Texas is to explore the treasures of Texas history buried right in our backyards. We strive to create a map for others inspired to follow and learn more about Texas beyond the textbook. Its people, towns, heritage, traditions, and the legends that led us to where we are today. Please share your stories or questions by email to any of our social media platforms. Let's learn from and alongside each other as we dig for another nugget of Texas history. For now, sit back, put your boots up, and get ready for another episode on Crazy for Texas. Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to Crazy for Texas. I'm your host, Amber. It is good to be back in the saddle again. I know it has been a minute since we last got together, so I want to tell you how much we appreciate you for hanging on. The last time we were together, I shared my brother-in-law was in the hospital, dedicating the episode to my Bubba. Well, it is with great ambivalence that I share of his passing. Thank you for patiently waiting for us as we took the time to be together as a family to remember Jamie Pilkington and be there for his wife and my sister, Kimberly. I want to personally thank you and tell you how much we were touched by those who reached out with your kind words and encouragement during this time. As Jamie gets to have his first Thanksgiving with Jesus, his mama and sister, and other family members and friends that have passed on before him, there will be an empty seat at our table. Please continue to pray for our family, and especially my sister, as we learn to navigate life without him by our sides while cherishing the laughter, love, and memories he left behind with us. Sissy, this one's for you. It is never easy having an empty seat during the holidays, no matter the reason. Death, a family quarrel, distance of miles, having to share our loved ones with their in-laws or other family members, illness. I can remember the first Christmas after the COVID outbreak. Although things seemed to have settled down from the start of the pandemic in the U.S. from that previous March, December was when COVID first came to visit our homes. We took no chances in infecting our loved ones, choosing to stay away from each other for everyone's health. Man, was it hard. I know it was the same for many of you. Some leave an empty seat because they're working. The daily grind for some must answer the call of work no matter the date. Some leave an empty seat because they are sacrificing for our freedoms to congregate and celebrate with our loved ones, all while they are serving in the military, away from home, or even deployed. In honor of this past Veterans Day, I would like to share a tale close to the hearts of our veterans that many of us Texans may not even know about. Before this episode, I know I was one of them. As Blake Stillwell explains in his August 2022 article for Military.com, Veterans Day was initially celebrated as Armistice Day on November 11, 1918, in recognition of the World War I at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month. In 1954, President Eisenhower signed the bill to change it to Veterans Day to include all veterans, especially after World War II and the Korean War. As a 70s baby, my knowledge of wars is very limited to what I can barely remember from my history classes and the news from the Gulf War when I was in high school. Before researching for our episode, I would have said that Pearl Harbor and 9/11 were the only attacks on American soil outside of the American Revolution. However, in an article written by Ray Kavanaugh of Time Publications, published on July 20th, 2018, 100 years earlier, on July 21st in 1918, Kavanaugh reports a German submarine fired torpedoes and shells at an unarmed tugboat right off the coast of Cape Cod during World War I. I had no idea. Am I the only one? I was only familiar with the infamous Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor during World War II. Until that fateful day, December 7th, 1941, the U.S. had managed to remain neutral since the start of the war a little over 2 years beforehand. Jenny Ashcraft reports in her article World War II, POW Camps in the United States for Fold3.com. At this point in World War II, the United Kingdom was running out of room in their prisons for housing Axis prisoners of war. So they reached out to the U.S. for assistance. Now, side note, Axis referred to the alliance of Germany, Italy, and Japan, and those that were on their side in the war. So, concerning the captured POWs, the first hurdle was to figure out how they would transport them to the United States. Well, we just swapped them for our soldiers. Let me explain. Our Liberty ships sailed across the ocean to deliver U.S. soldiers to foreign lands where the battles were taking place. After dropping off our military, the vessels would then load and return with the POWs. At first, we were bringing home 20,000 POWs a month with each trip, but eventually, 20,000 turned into 30,000. 30,000 turned into 40,000. Oh, my word. Towards the end of the war, and upwards of 60,000 POWs were being brought back each month. It is easy to see how the United States ended up taking care of more than 425,000 German, Japanese, and Italian POWs by the end of the war, just 2 years later. Once the prisoners reached American soil, they were then transported by heavily guarded trains to their destinations. Now, for the second hurdle we had to cross. These prisoners were coming, but where in the world were we going to house them? The late professor from Texas A&M, Arnold Kramer, explained in his essay, When the Africa Corps Came to Texas, he explains, up to this point in history, the U.S. had never held large numbers of foreign prisoners of war before. First and foremost, the War Department wanted to abide by the Articles of the Geneva Convention. Okay, so let me just take a minute to pause and clarify a few things here. If you're like me, you might have been familiar with the phrase Geneva Convention and even understood that there was some sort of connection with war. But I wanted to do a little bit of digging just to make sure I truly understood why the Geneva Convention governed our decisions concerning how and where the U.S. would care for our POWs as much as it did during this time. And I gotta tell you, I'm glad I took the time to read up on this because it's pretty interesting. Okay, so according to the website for the History Channel, the Geneva Convention dates back to 1863, inspired by Henry Dunant. The editors of History.com share the story of Dunant's visit to northern Italy in 1859 to visit Emperor Napoleon III's headquarters. Now, although he was only seeking land rights to start up a business, he ended up witnessing the nightmarish and gruesome wake of Italy's Second War of Independence. He was so impacted by what he'd seen. In 1862, Henry Dunant wrote a Memory of Solferino, which detailed his first-hand account in addition to proposing a solution. Quote, unquote, all nations come together to create trained volunteer relief groups to treat battlefield wounded and offer humanitarian assistance to those affected by war. Dunant, an early form of the Red Cross, and others got together and set up a kind of think tank to brainstorm ways to have his ideas come to fruition. The following year, delegates from 16 different countries from around the globe met in Geneva to consider the terms of a wartime humanitarian agreement. As a result, 12 of the 16 countries signed the treaty, which became known as the First Geneva Convention. An interesting side note, because of his efforts in standing up for those wounded in battle and POWs, Henry Dunant had won the first Nobel Peace Prize in 1901. Well, throughout the years, amendments and additions to the Geneva Convention were discussed and voted upon, addressing concerns that arose from battlefield entanglements, especially after World War I. Honestly, it would only make sense that as our rules of engagement in war evolve, the treatment of those affected by war should advance to parallel the evolution. So, this is one of the reasons why the United States War Department was so adamant in following the Geneva Convention. We wanted to make sure that we'd adhered to all the guidelines spelled out regarding the treatment of prisoners of war, especially since the U.S. hadn't had much experience in taking care of foreign POWs. Now, I know all of you have got to be wondering, saying, this is crazy for Texas. So why, Amber, this is all interesting and all, but what in the world does this have to do with Texas? Well, I'm glad you asked. One of the rules outlined in the Geneva Convention concerning prisoners of war, POWs not only were entitled to the same treatment and conditions of the armies in charge, they were also to be taken to an area that mimicked the climate and weather that they had been captured in. Considering the surrender of the African Corps, 150,000 German POWs would be heading to the U.S. from Tunisia, Africa. Now, I know that we have talked all about Texas heat before. Well, it is the same heat that attracted the War Department to the idea of housing the POWs in Texas. Our size and location, it was also pretty idyllic, conveniently located far away from pivotal war industries established on both the east and west coasts of the United States. So, Texas, here we come. In the 1995 Texas Handbook article, German Prisoners of War, our expert Aggie, Arnold Kramer, explains Texas housed double the amount of POW camps as any other state in the nation. By the end of the war, there were 78,982 prisoners of war in our Lone Star State. So we've got the land, but are they just going to be popping up some tents or what? Well, remember how those Liberty ships would have been returning empty after dropping off our soldiers in foreign countries? Well, while our soldiers were gone, their barracks were empty too. The first locations to fill up would have been the military camps already set up and vacant. These would have been Camp Barkley near Abilene, Camp Bowie near Brownwood in central Texas, Camp Fannin near Tyler, Camp Hood near Killeen. Now, y'all forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but Camp Housey in Gainesville, Camp Houlihan in Palacios, which, interesting side notes, we grew up going to the Texas Baptist Encampment Church Camp in the summers, and I had no idea that they had a POW camp there. Okay, so Camp Maxey, close to Paris, Camp Swift in Bastrop, Camp Walters in Mineral Wells, Fort Bliss next to El Paso, Fort Brown way down south in Brownsville, Fort Crockett in Galveston, Fort D.A. Russell near Marfa. Ooh, I bet you they have some interesting stories. And then Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. Additional base camps were set up, like in Brady, located in the center of Texas, Hearn, near College Station, Hereford and McLean in the Panhandle, Huntsville, Mejia, east of Waco, and Wallace, close to Galveston. And of course, there were dozens more that were considered private agricultural branches, like in Anahuac, Liberty, and even in Rosenberg. Now, these were located mostly in East Texas, from Center all the way down the coast towards El Campo. In Kramer's article for the Handbook of Texas, he explains the living quarters and conditions of many of the temporary visitors. The main camps were military barracks with watchtowers. Few American guards were really needed to oversee the prisoners because, as Kramer puts it, the actual discipline among the prisoners was rigidly enforced by the German officers and sergeants themselves. Now, as the military camps filled up and additional camps were created, some were housed in old army tents, and even a few circus tents went up, as reported by Rachel Stone in her 2016 article, The POW Camps Who Occupied White Rock Lake during World War II, in the Lakewood East Dallas's Advocate magazine. Now, I'm not sure how the Texans might have felt about their new neighbors entirely. A little over 20 years ago, I had moved to Richmond, literally down the road from the Jester Unit 4 prison. Now, when I would be on my way to work, it was a little disconcerting in the beginning, passing the chain gang working in the fields along with the guards mounted on horseback. But after seeing it so often, the hairs on the back of my neck no longer stood up when I'd pass. Well, that is, unless there was word of an escapee. Just so, initially, some of the locals were a little uneasy of having Nazis literally in their backyard, and understandably perturbed that these foreigners were here while their loved ones were up against their kind overseas. But not everyone shared their sentiment. As Professor Kramer explains in his essay, businessmen and farmers gave their best efforts in petitioning to have the prisoners come to Texas to fill the empty spots left by the able bodies that had left to go fight in the war. I mentioned earlier that there were the satellite camps along East Texas and the coast. Well, these are where the rice fields were, and they were in desperate need of help in harvesting. So as time passed, the naysayers finally came around, and as the scales from their eyes and hearts melted away, as they began to see the POWs were honestly no different from them, and they were great for how much help that they had offered the communities while working. In accordance with the Geneva Convention, the POWs were paid for their labor, which, as Jenny Ashcraft further explains, could be used to purchase luxuries like cigarettes, soda, and even ice cream. To the POWs, much of these were luxuries because they weren't available back in their home countries because of the shortages and rationing. Across the state of Texas, POWs could be found working on farms, at factories, special projects like the Denison Dam and Reservoir, and then even constructing roads and barracks in their camps. As described by a lesson by the Texas Historical Commission, some of them even worked as orderlies at local hospitals in Texas. Working was a choice for many of the prisoners, and they chose this just to give them something to do to pass the time. In German Prisoners of War, Kramer describes a typical day for a POW began with reveille at 5:45 a.m. and ended at 10 p.m. The prisoners were able to feed their day with work, taking care of their personal needs, taking educational courses by fellow POWs, or, get this, correspondence courses through local schools and universities. Some camps created a POW orchestra with the instruments that they had given them, while others created newspapers and even sports teams to play out in the yard. There were some reported differences between some of the camps. Kramer describes the Spartan conditions at Fort Bliss, where 3,000 Germans lived with an air of mistrust by guards and the locals. However, in contrast, Italian POWs at the Coliseum branch near El Paso, they were able to swim in the local pool, attend church, and had an ample supply of beer and even got to flirt with the girls through the fences. I guess what they say about girls not being able to resist a good-looking Italian man was true even back then. As for me, I have my eyes set on a bearded Greek man. At any rate, most of the camps were a far cry from the vibes Fort Bliss gave off. POWs were able to decorate their temporary homes and mess halls with artwork, chandeliers, pictures of their families and loved ones. They even took care of the landscaping and built lawn furniture. If you have ever had the chance to visit Camp Hearn near College Station, you may have seen a mini castle the POWs built that is still standing today. It seems like that they were allowed to truly make their time here a home away from home. It is kind of sad that in some ways, their time in Texas was even better than where they'd come from. Professor Kramer explains, the incoming prisoners sat down to see foods that most of them had not tasted in years: meats, eggs, tomatoes, green vegetables, milk, and real coffee. Food, hospitality, and being able to escape from the environment of war, I can understand how many of them spoke highly of their time in the States. Working closely together, it wasn't uncommon for bonds between POWs and farmers to grow over supping together and sharing holidays. Many of these relationships continued through correspondence and immigration sponsorships even after the war ended. Now, don't get me wrong. It wasn't all sunshine and roses for all the POWs. Remember, they were still prisoners of war. Some did try and escape. Remember those Italian stallions? Well, they were the ones that escaped or tried to escape most often. It was hard to know if they felt it was their responsibility to escape due to their home country allegiance, or if they were worried about their families back home or suffering from a severe case of homesickness, or if they were just in need of a night out in the company of a girl. Some of the ways these POWs escaped were quite unique and comical, to say the least. Some would hang underneath laundry trucks that were leaving the camp, pole vaulting over fences. They got pretty creative. You have got to check out some of these articles I've mentioned here. There are so many interesting accounts and stories. I could go on and on. I've put links in our show notes so that you can read more about it. One of my favorites is Jenny Ashcraft's blogging article for Fold 3. Many people responded to her article with stories of their own, like Americans traveling to Germany and having a former POW buy their dinner while sharing their account and story in appreciation of their time in the States. You really need to go check them out. I'm glad that most of the POWs could look back on their time in the Texas POW camps with a grateful heart and maybe a few fond memories. I'd like to think our Southern Texas charm and hospitality was what made a difference in their stay here in the States. And although I have no doubt that many of them might have left crazy for Texas too, But I think that there might have been something else lingering in the back of the locals' minds that encouraged them to keep minding their P's and Q's. The Geneva Convention provided the rules of war. But remember the old saying? Treat others the way you want to be treated? Well, the POWs were allowed to send letters back and forth with their people back home. The sentiment was if the POWs shared how well they were being treated, the same treatment would be extended to their loved ones that were held captive overseas. Unfortunately, we know most often this was not the case. As World War II came to an end in the spring of 1945, POWs were transferred to larger camps in preparation for their return to their homelands. In his 1995 article for the Texas Handbook, Arnold Kramer shares the fates of the POW camps. Some were actually gone ahead and torn down. Camp Huntsville became a part of Sam Houston State University. Camp Mejia became the site of the Mejia State School. And Camp Swift and Bastrop was split into several different things. Part of it was housing developments. There was a UT Cancer Research Center, a unit for the Texas National Guard, and even a prison. Some camps were even torn down and became the site of the county fairgrounds. There are remnants of this part of Texas history where you can still visit, like Fort Crockett in Galveston and even Camp Hearn near College Station. There are so many of these POW camps across the Texas. If you happen to be close to one of these camps, send us a picture of y'all in front of the historical marker or any building that still might be standing there to share on our website. We'd love to see and share pictures of others who are crazy for Texas and the history that y'all have found in your own very own backyards. We are really excited about an upcoming event at Camp Hearn. Okay. So typically they're open Wednesday through Saturday from 11 to 4 p.m. But they have a special event coming up on Saturday, December 16th at 5:45 p.m. called Camp Hearn Coast Walk. So here, visitors are going to get to go on a guided tour hearing the story of Hugo Cross, a true story of a POW that lived and died there. And then afterwards, we'll all be partaking in 1940 holiday traditions on the American and German home fronts. Y'all, this is free. Please let us know if you and your family are going to be headed there. Crazy for Texas will be there, and we would love to meet up with y'all. Now, I also want to give y'all a heads up about another upcoming event that Crazy for Texas is taking part in. You may have seen it on our Facebook page, but on December 2nd, we will be volunteering for the Fields of Honor, a luminous tribute at San Jacinto to commemorate the sacrifice of over 21,500 Texans who have at some point given their lives in armed conflict. We're hosting a group volunteering to place the lights out on the field. Now, if you're unable to come help, that's fine. Please come out and see the spectacular display at the San Jacinto battlefield. It's going to be open to the public that evening from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. We are so honored to be a part of this special event and plan to have lots of video and pictures taken. So if you miss out, you'll be able to see it on TikTok and our YouTube channel. Okay, so here we go. Now for one of y'all's favorite pieces of the episode. That's right, famous Texans. Here we go. Have you ever heard of the name Dan Rather? I had no clue. He is referred to as one of the most influential American journalists of the modern era. Well, Mr. Rather was not only born in Wharton, where a POW camp was located, he then attended college at Sam Houston State, the school that was once a part of the POW camp of Huntsville. What a small world. Okay, now for our second famous Texan, Sadie Sink, who y'all may know as Max Mayfield from Stranger Things. That's right. Our girl grew up in Brenham, Texas, which is just about an hour south of the home of Camp Hearn. How cool is that? Well, before I let you go, I want to leave you with the final thought. At times, life leads us down some paths that can be lonely, frightening, and even unexpected. Often, we are only able to see the storm that we are weathering in the moment or the aftermath that has been scattered in front of us. It is only when we choose to lift our eyes up that we can see the rainbow and find joy despite our circumstances. Amid trials, there's always something to be thankful for. When we are transparent in sharing our joy during pain and disappointment, Our example helps harvest hearts of thanksgiving in others. We here at Crazy for Texas are thankful for you and pray you and y'all's family have a blessed and joy-filled holiday, even if there's an empty seat at your table too. Be kind to someone unexpected. Who knows if someone is missing somebody from their table or what's going on in their lives. It may not change their circumstances, but it just might change their perspective and give them a reason to look up. Have a happy Thanksgiving, y'all. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review so we can grow and reach more listeners. To hold you over until our next adventure, visit us at crazyfortexas.net for more information and content about our explorations of the history of our great state of Texas beyond the textbook. Be sure to also check us out on YouTube and Facebook at Crazy for Texas and on TikTok at crazyfortexas.net. Remember, if you have any questions or suggestions about an episode you've heard, or even if you have an idea or a piece of your own history that's been passed down your family tree that you'd like us to explore for a future show, please contact me at host@crazyfortexas.net. Until next time.